Today, we're digging into a pretty wide-ranging and, well, provocative commentary by Victor Davis Hanson on the state of American politics and culture right now.
So here's how we're going to break this down. Hanson's argument really has four key parts. We're going to start with his take on what he calls political incompetence. Then we'll get into his analysis of the economic ideas he thinks are behind it. After that, we'll look at who he holds up as a positive contrast, Elon Musk. And finally, we'll get to his biggest point, which is about the whole idea of truth in our public life. All right, so first up, Hanson kicks things off by zooming in on the Munich Security Conference. He basically uses it as a case study for what he sees as a really concerning lack of expertise among some American leaders on the world stage.
And wow, he does not hold back. His sharpest criticism is really aimed at Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He was so unimpressed with her comments on a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan that he sarcastically said her performance made Vice President Kamala Harris sound like a great classical orator. So what he's getting at is pretty obvious. He found her statements to be seriously lacking. According to Hanson, it wasn't just one thing. He argues that she made several big factual mistakes. From apparently fumbling the standard U.S. policy on Taiwan, to a geography mix-up about Venezuela's location, and even what he says is a misreading of the history of the American cowboy. And for Hanson, look, this isn't just about a few slip-ups. He sees it as proof of a fundamental lack of preparation. And this wasn't an isolated thing. Hanson also pointed to Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Hillary Clinton, arguing their comments and actions fit into a broader pattern. In his view, all of these moments together point to a worrying trend among some American representatives on the world stage.
But for Hanson, this isn't just about individuals messing up. He thinks it comes from a much deeper ideological place. So he shifts gears a bit and looks at New York City's finances to make his point, holding it up as a kind of case study for what he calls the socialist mind.
And he really drives this home with one number that'll probably make you blink. $14,431. According to Hanson, that's how much New York City's budget costs every single person living there, every single year.
Now, to really put that in perspective, Hanson compares it directly to Miami. He points out that Miami runs its city on a budget of less than $7,000 per citizen. That's less than half of New York's. And for Hanson, that's the whole point, right? It's not just a difference in dollars and cents, it's a completely different philosophy of governing.
So where does this massive cost come from? Well, Hanson points the finger directly at the city's mayor and his political approach. He states things like an immediate $11 billion spending hike and what he describes as a failure to manage basic city services as proof that this ideology just isn't working.
And this gets us to the core of his economic argument. He connects all these policies to what he calls the socialist mind. He says a key part of this thinking is something called the labor theory of value. Basically, it's this idea that people should be paid based on how hard they work or how much they suffer for a job, while completely ignoring things like, supply and demand or whether someone has rare expertise. Okay, so after all that criticism, Hanson wants to show us the flip side. He holds up someone he thinks embodies a totally different, more traditional American way of doing things, Elon Musk.
Hanson's take is, don't just think of Musk as some tech billionaire. No, he says Musk is more like a modern version of America's great inventors from the past, a builder, like an Edison or the Wright brothers.
The big difference for Hanson is that Musk actually builds physical, concrete things. He really hammers this point home. He's talking about things you can actually touch and see, like Tesla cars, Starlink internet, and SpaceX rockets, that solve real problems, and he contrasts that with government programs that he sees as just abstract and ineffective.
So you might be wondering, how does he connect all of this? A critique of politicians in Europe and praise for a CEO in Texas? Well, he says they're both symptoms of a much bigger cultural shift, and that brings us to his final and maybe most important point.
And to really illustrate this final point, he brings up the example of Maryland Governor Wes Moore, and specifically the controversies that have come up around his life story.
Hanson highlights several key parts of Moore's celebrated biography that have been challenged. Claims about where he was born, his family's history, even his Oxford thesis. He argues that these stories, which are central to Moore's whole political identity, are just demonstrably not true.
But here's the part that Hanson really latches onto. It's not just the claims, it's the defense. As he tells it, when Moore's team was challenged on the facts, their response was basically that to question the story was to question the oral tradition of the Black culture.
And for Hanson, boom, that's it. That's the heart of the matter.
He sees this defense as a perfect example of this huge cultural shift, where your personal story, my truth, isn't just a story anymore. It's being treated as if it's just as valid, or maybe even more valid, than objective, verifiable facts.
So you see how he ties it all together, from diplomatic slip-ups to a city's budget to a governor's biography. For Hanson, they all point to one big overarching argument, that American public life is drifting away from a world of expertise and facts and into a new reality based on ideology and personal stories.
So, in the end, Hanson's entire commentary really leaves us with a pretty challenging question to think about. In a world where everyone seems to have their own truth, what happens to the truth? What is the role of objective fact in our society today?